Welcome back, everyone, to Data Analytics Chat, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges happening in the data and AI world. In today's chat, we're going to look at the impact in the FinTech sector, focusing on startups and maturing businesses, looking at analytics and AI. I mean, obviously, it's a crucial area for businesses, driving innovation, improving decision making, and unlocking growth opportunities for businesses. So let's welcome today's guest. So today's guest is Manil Manohar, who is head of data at Ratepay, a FinTech company based in Berlin, Germany. Welcome.
Thanks, Ben.
Cool. So do you want to just give a brief introduction to yourself?
Sure. So yeah, I'm leading the data domain at Ratepay. And Ratepay itself is a fintech company, been around for at least a decade. So if I look back on my career, I've worked in different areas of analytics, be it sales analytics, marketing tech, commercial. You have your call center analytics. So really, across the board, I've worked in domains within a company which look at a certain problem and want to quantify addressing it through data. So taking an informed decision and following up on the effectiveness of that decision through a data-driven strategy. So working in different domains has given me different perspectives on how can one look at a problem and how would they like to apply data to solve it. So that's largely been my background, and it's led up to right now where I'm leading a department that looks at data holistically. So here at Ratepay, when we say data, we really mean data engineering to ingest the data, do the first level of aggregation, and try to answer second and third order level questions through various other competencies like BI, we have product analytics and advanced analytics. Yeah, pretty exciting space, and yeah, really keen to chat about how AI impacts this area.
Yeah, it's a buzzing area now, isn't it? Everyone's talking about it. So I guess, what was your motivation to work in this field?
Yeah, I think curiosity drives me, and it drives me in different ways depending on the problem at hand. Naturally, we're all prone to take decisions based on personal preferences and biases. And especially in a business context, really, the data really helps me get a independent perspective on the problem and kind of pressure test different ideas. So this is what we call as a hypothesis testing framework. So we have a certain output variable. We look at, hey, what is it doing? How is it trending? How can we test different things that affect its trend line? Can we change it in a preferable way? So this is the kind of thought and applied data and analytics that really drives me.
Cool. No, it's always good to see people's motivations and how they end up in their role. Because there's a lot of people obviously wanting to get into this field now, isn't it? And I guess it's quite challenging for juniors now because businesses tend to want experienced people with domain experience. So it is obviously a challenge to get into the field. Okay, cool. So let's move into the first question then. So how have the advancements in analytics and AI technologies sort of transformed the fintech industry in recent years?
So if I abstract the fintech industry, what it tries to do is bridge the gap between traditional banking and kind of modern tech stack. So in traditional banking, we have a person who kind of deposits and make withdrawals from a bank. And bank would use this kind of centralized fund to make further investments into any of the other industries. So they, on one hand, provide safety for money from customers, always safe and guarantee a safe access to it. They would then leverage that safety to make investments externally. So it's a system that's worked very well over the last 100 years, except for all the financial crisis that comes around it. So that was a joke in the sense it is safe, but also it's got its weaknesses. So fintech really has a leverage in the sense it democratizes access to money because you can access it through your mobile, your laptop. That's really what's the game changer around fintech. People can access money on demand. And that's really the essence that draws people to fintech. So if we were to go with that assumption that fintech is really there to democratize access, on-demand access to money, AI, generative LLM, all of these come into the play of improving the experience a customer has with the banks or payment methods. So, like any other product, AI has really positioned itself as you can do things faster, more efficiently, with better customer satisfaction. So, if I were to dive in a bit deeper and focus on one use case, we can look at authentication as such a use case,
Hmm.
right? So, all of a sudden, we see since crypto has taken off, we have facial recognition increasingly become AI driven. So, you open up your phone, you look left, up, and down to access your crypto wallets. And now this is coming to some of the banking apps, and you have some of the players in the industry experimenting with this. And what they're really trying to do is mimic like the responses a real person would have in a banking experience. You go to a teller and you say, hey, here's my identity. This is me. Give me my money. So they want to
Hmm.
automate this whole process so you can do it from your couch, have the same level of authentication, and on demand. So that's my take on how AI can impact it. Now, depending on the type of transaction we're talking about, the degree of influence can change. You have PayPal, you have credit cards, you have Ratepay who offer white label invoicing. So each of these providers react to this differently. And it's all tailored towards the end customer who's using a specific payment method.
Yep. So just I guess the big change is just the efficiency and speed.
Efficiency, speed, and the satisfaction one gets out of it. So if there's like a customer journey or a user flow that generates more customer contact, this is not really good for business because you're having to invest into AI and also into customer service. So they want these flows which kind of minimizes the support a business needs to give to make a transaction happen while getting more customer satisfaction out of it.
Cool, cool. And then, so how can startups leverage analytics to identify like untapped market opportunities and I guess customer segments?
Yeah. So this is where I'll have to lean in on my exposure to other payment methods because we at TradePay ourselves don't really do a lot of marketing and we put the
Hmm.
merchant first. So even if you use our payment method, chances are you don't know it's Ratepay because all you would see is the merchant's logo, and we really put the merchant in the forefront. If we look at some other players like PayPal, for example, recently they did a big announcement that they're enabling in the US market, they're enabling people under the age of 18 to use PayPal. So they're really unlocking this market segment, which has traditionally stayed out of banking. So now you have kids using PayPal or making transfers to each other in a reliable way. And over there, we also see that they're kind of using this hype or sometimes the impact of AI around the usage of mobile, trusting their mobile phone, knowing there's AI behind security to make that happen. For parents, they're guaranteeing that, yep, your kids can safely use it because we authenticate what's happening. We'll make sure the
Hmm.
money is being sent to the right person. More broadly, I think now increasingly AI is leaning towards crypto rather than traditional payment methods. So, like I was saying earlier, there's facial recognition, fingerprint recognition, all of that within traditional banking. But largely, it's also going towards crypto and how one would monetize, say, something like metaverse.
Okay, good. And do you see crypto as the big opportunity then at the minute for fintech space?
Is the biggest next opportunity. So, if you look at what are the
Hmm.
factors that could help a business improve their margins, we see a lot of
Yeah.
big banks leaning more towards integrating crypto trades within their mobile banking app. If you look at Revolut, for example, or to an extent, Trade Republic, these are big companies that are really looking at how do we democratize access to money, be it crypto, be it fiat, be it market investments. It's a really interesting space which gives people access to spend money within one mobile app. It gives them access to spend money, but also invest if they're not
Hmm.
choosing to spend. Now, if I focus internally to payment methods, there's a lot of ways we increase security. So facial recognition, fingerprint, SMS, all of this. but also to make internal organization of data internally more effective and efficient. So this kind of leans more towards data literacy. But there's clearly customer-facing benefits, but internally, to make those data-driven decisions, we now collect so much information that it's hard to say what we are collecting. Is it usable? Is it going to make me improve any margins? So this is a really tough decision to take because there's so much data. And if we look at LLMs, especially the NLP aspect of it, the main use case that's close to analytics is people can ask questions, as random as it might seem, to a bunch of unstructured or structured data set. And it'll take that NLP input, translate it to an LLM, and retrieve all the data sets that's relevant. And not only retrieval of relevant data sets, but also aggregating it to a level that makes sense to the user. So what is doing internally within the organization is really transforming the whole process of a business decision maker having a curiosity to how they get the answer to it. Historically, they would need somebody like a BA who would capture the business requirements, convert them into a bunch of analytical requirements. You would then have an analyst and a data engineer who would crunch these numbers. You would have a systems analyst who would make sure the right data sources are coming through. But now we're seeing those intermediate roles going away, but the focus is really on here's all the source data. Here's an LLM which will digest all of this in split second. It'll digest all user requests in split seconds and merge the two. So I think this is where it's really revolutionizing how organizations look at data internally. And historically, there have been a lot of tools that have tried to do this. If you take Tableau, for example, they really disrupted the reporting and BI market, which was traditionally relying on Excel, and they migrated to Tableau. And they offer this service. They've been offering these services for at least 7 years. They call it Einstein now, but this kind of free text-based retrieval of data is something that's embedded into modern day tech stacks. And only now are we seeing the investments they've made then come into fruition. There were some people who jumped on the curve soon, but I think majority of the industry is starting to trust AI-driven solutions more now, especially in a reporting context.
It's interesting. So there's a lot, like I said, I think that's the biggest challenge for businesses is the amount of data that they have. Every business talked to is obviously key. The big challenge is obviously the data management, data engineering side is obviously Gen AI has been good. Obviously, there's a lot of benefit and future, but also it's creating a lot more problems for businesses because businesses now have got to find access or got to translate data, haven't they now? I think that's the hard bit. Realizing it is a massive project.
Yep. Another curious thing happening right now is, so if you look at any business decision maker or a business, there are two phases, right? It's a people-run business. So on one hand, they're looking at the business they're running, trying to take the best decision. If you look at their personal life, if you look at what are they seeing when they're not on a 9-to-5 job, they're really seeing ads with AI being positioned as for image generation, video generation. Like when I go on YouTube, for example, the ads I see in support of AI is largely around, we'll take your pictures and make it move. We're at this point where a person who's a decision maker in a business is starting to be biased with what an AI can do. And that's the situation we're in because just the modern day LLM AI, the whole spectrum is, say, 1 year old. If you look back on when ChatGPT exploded. If you work with that timeline of 1 year old, there's been a lot of chaos. All of that has consolidated into will make pictures move on one hand. And that's starting to have an impact on business decision makers of what AI could mean for their business. So that's really where we are. And people who have always been data driven can tell the difference between AI for personal life and AI for business life. But in some other cases, the differences might not be so clear, especially when it comes to marketing, for example. If you talk about ROI of AI-driven imagery, it's a hard conversation to have right now because the arguments for pros and cons are equally at balance. Now, if I go a step further and say, hey, how can AI help me increase the ROI on your data products? This is also a hard conversation because depending on the order of the question the user asks, the AI could be useful or not useful at all.
Yeah. And I agree. I think obviously the expectation on AI is up here, isn't it? It's really high. But
Yeah.
at the end of the days, I think the biggest challenge I think businesses have is obviously what's the biggest problem at the minute and what can be solved easiest. And
Yeah.
that's where you want to get to. You don't want to be, I mean, everyone I speak to, there's so many different use cases businesses want to do, but is it really going to make, is it going to end day? Businesses just want growth. Like you want
Yeah.
to keep growing. And if you're focusing on like projects that are not going to have the ROI, it's not critical at the minute, is it?
100%. So I think we're at this stage where there's a lot of hype and people are excited, and excitement is critical, right? Higher the entropy in a situation, more chances there'll be an outcome that's different to where we are today. So there's a lot of entropy in the space. There's a lot of excitement. Luckily or unluckily, I'm not having to have these discussions yet in my current role. But if I look at some of the conversations that are developing in the data space largely, especially in meetups or any situations like this, the topic revolves around data products and what kind of data hygiene do you need to have to make sure AI is doing the right thing. And the right thing is an abstract concept, right? So you can bias decisions based on the output variables, applies to humans, applies to AI. I really like the way, especially in Berlin, the way the discussions are developing around these meetups are around how do we make organizations data centric? No matter what decision maker is looking at the data product, the outcome would be in favor of solving the real problem and not in favor of a bias. So this could be a person or an AI looking at a data set. So ultimately, the data set needs to be really robust.
Yeah. I think obviously now data driven it's like, I mean, businesses flipping themselves on their head, really, isn't it? It's a complete transformation, isn't it? I think that every company you speak to, they know where they want to get to, A to B. And it's just that middle bit in between. It's the change management aspect, communication aspect, which I think is the biggest challenge because people get, like take the Gen AI, for example. Businesses had their plan, Gen AI comes, and then they get sidetracked and they're going somewhere else. Where
Yep.
was that really the most critical thing at that period in time to focus on? I think change management in that space is definitely, everyone I speak to is the definite biggest challenge that I overcome. You're dealing with humans and humans all act differently.
100%. Humans react differently and businesses react differently as a concept. You called out a certain point there that made me think of it from a different angle again. So if you look at the last 10 years in tech, there are lots of charts published out there of how really low borrowing rates on investments into tech has driven employment, has driven like this rapid growth we've seen in tech. Now, after COVID hit, the interest on the borrowing amounts on tech in general, no matter where you look at it, be it people investment or capex investments, the investments have gone up, and all businesses are critically looking at the ROI on any new tech stack that's introduced. And this is a really cool change. This means the focus has really gone into let's look at the outcome something produces rather than the influencing factor itself. So the conversations are more tailored towards, or at least this is my feeling, what's the outcome we're influencing by introducing OpenAI? How can we test the hypothesis and follow through? Rather than saying, let's introduce OpenAI and see what happens. So for me, this is a really good development. Higher interest rates is not good for anyone. People borrow less money, spend less money. But one of the good outcomes I see, at least for the businesses, is they're really critically looking at trialing AI and have this outcome-focused, data-driven strategy towards it.
Yeah. No, interesting. Okay. So as we touched on Gen AI, how can Gen AI be used to assess risk factors and develop migration strategies for startups in the fintech space?
So the closest use case I can think of are co-pilots, at least in my realm. So data, again, is factual, no matter how much spin we put around it. It's seen as these neutral entities who look at a measurement, report on it with 100% transparency. Right? At least the discussions I'm having right now, be it internally or externally, is around, okay, so generative AI is really good at taking input variables, looking back on all the neural networks that have been developed so far using those data points, and seeing which one of those would be relevant for my current use case. To change that abstraction to something more specific, it means if I have a certain task at hand to write a certain piece of SQL code or a Python code, how can I minimize the time for an engineer or a developer to go from an abstract problem to the exact solution needed? So we see this Copilot come in where it auto-completes your syntaxes. Not really game changer, but it does it better by 3x. Instead of just completing a word, it completes the sentence because it has a huge neural network that's seen other people choose that syntax. So here Copilot's good. Another use case where it's really good is me personally. Now I'm leaning more towards project management, strategy, leading people. So me personally, understanding code can be a bit of a challenge because I'm a bit far away from the nitty-gritty of things. Where Gen AI helps me is take a bit of unstructured codes, be as hacky as it may, as well structured as it may, paste it into Copilot or ChatGPT, and it gives me a commented interpretation of it. Really well structured, tells me what every line is doing. It's telling me where there are inefficiencies or a certain component of it is unnecessary. Now, for me, this is like a real game changer. This means, especially when it comes to transition periods. So change management is a huge challenge for organizations. And it's like an exponential curve when it comes to difficulty based on the size of the organization. So if the two of us were a company, say one of us leaves, managing that change is a lot easier than 1,000 people company and half of them leave. And the biggest driver of that kind of effort is knowledge management, right? So how do you get the knowledge you have into something that's understandable by me? And this is where things like co-pilots are coming in handy. And any of these kind of LLM-driven technologies, which can take anyone's written content and transform it to meaningful with a different context. They've tried it with video, and I think especially as we were coming out of COVID, Atlassian was offering Confluence as the main documenting tool. And then they started advertising for a video-based documenting tool. There were ads everywhere. I forgot the name. I don't know what happened, but that was another angle around how can we leverage more of video analytics to do knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing, and to enable more efficient change management. So far, video imagery, in my personal experience, I haven't seen a lot of use cases where this has been successful, but when it comes to written form, like code and interpretation, it's, very effective change.
Yeah. Like you mentioned, obviously, a lot of people are now, data leaders are, ranting about Copilot. It's obviously going to benefit them so massively. And I guess especially lots of when you are moving from that technical expertise role into more people management, if you can obviously use Gen AI to help you with your knowledge, it's going to save you so much time, isn't it? Because that's the biggest bit. People, obviously, when you move away from the code, is obviously you losing that expertise there because you're obviously focusing something elsewhere. So if that can contribute to that knowledge gap, obviously that's going to be beneficial for all people.
No, 100%. I'm really amazed by the detail it goes into. It really identifies which part of the code might not be necessary. And this is like something beyond my imagination. So starting off in analytics, say 7, 8 years ago, I always imagined, I could be twice as effective in my job if I didn't have to do all this debugging. And I think any engineer, any analyst has this kind of feeling inherently in their work. So when we see OpenAI come in, it solves this problem of one could be twice as effective and efficient. So that's an obvious, but really this aspect of debugging, analyzing what could be improved. This is, like a step change that was not expected from me.
No, that's good. It's good. Obviously, if you can save your time and it's beneficial. How can AI then be used to like personalize customer experiences and obviously improve customer satisfaction? Obviously, is
Yep.
a big one, especially within the financial services sector.
Yep. So within finance, if we look at what are the categories of requests fintech company would get from its customer base, one is general FAQ. So what happens next? What can I expect next? These kind of non-PII related queries. This is one cohort. And then there is PII specific questions, which are very specific to the customers, right? So it's, I got this email on email XYZ. I want to have this sent to another email. So if we were just having this conversation, if I was having this conversation as a customer to a bank teller, it's very free, it's very open. But as long as we take this conversation and translate it to text, there's a lot of GDPR and PII components that come into play. In the sense, what in the context of what's being said, how much of it could be used to identify somebody as a person? So this is largely what's referred to as PII. So in this kind of personal support kind of aspect, I think there are like pros and cons of using AI. But if I scale back up and go to the other main use case of general FAQ type of questions, here AI can be very effective because it's good at reading questions being asked, give it a certain context and retrieve an answer. And here there's little to no impact on customer privacy. There's a lot of impact this can have on a business's efficiency and cost of answering these questions. From a customer's point of view, no matter how general a question is, they still expect an answer. So OpenAI, when it comes to like non-PII questions, I think can be very effective in the turnaround time and the first contact resolution times, simply because it knows exactly what the customer is asking. I'm not sure if I went away too much from the question there.
No, and then obviously, I guess on the customer experience, then I guess how would you like compare it? Like, how do you know improvements have been made? How would you monitor it?
Yep. So if we go back way in time, there was this test that was developed. I forgot the name of it, but it was essentially a test which kind of gives a response to a person, and the person has to say whether it's computer generated or is it person generated.
Mm-hmm.
It was like this really famous test that took off when AI was really being developed at least 40, 50 years ago. And I think that kind of a simplistic approach is still the best way to measure the impact of AI. So if a customer feels like it's a bot replying to them, this is already a turnoff. This is as comparable to these audio guided messages we get when we call a customer center. No matter how much we try, it's not the same experience. And the same applies for chatbots or LLM driven responses. So one of the ways to look at this is understanding what's the baseline today, what's the turnaround time, what's the NPS of the customer after the contact. You take that as a baseline and apply that to the traffic that's routed through to LLM pathway. And the key difference here is a person could, and the risk for the business really comes down to having low turnaround times and NPS that's deteriorating over time. This means we are responding faster to the customer with an answer that's not really helping them. Be it because it's lacking personal touch. Dear customer, it's an example. So if this is a response from an LLM, even if the content is right, the customer is overall not happy with the way they're being treated. Signatures at the end of it. If a person sends me an email, this is a bit more meaningful than a bot signing off with chatbot. So it's really this kind of personal experiences that makes the difference, regardless of how right the content delivered to the customer is.
Yeah, no, I guess cool. And it's interesting to see how changes are happening in this space because I think people are getting more, they do want that personal touch. So I think it's people just expecting now, I think, is the big thing. How can AI obviously be like used to monitor and detect fraudulent activities then, especially in this field?
When you talk about activities, what are we thinking of?
Like fraudulent activities
Oh, got you. Yeah.
or
Yep.
sorry.
So, especially in the payment space, when we talk about risk in general, right? So it's all about when we accept a transaction or a transfer or a gift voucher, what is the risk we're taking on? And the risk can be broadly classified into two things. One is the credibility of the person initiating the transaction. And this is really based on the previous purchase patterns. And there are a lot of these regulatory firms who look at a person, look at all the transactions they've done universally, and give them a credit score. We could look at it from a credit rating perspective. There's another aspect of fraud. They could be an open AI acting to be me, right? And then doing a transaction. In that sense, the persona it's taking on has 100% passes the credit check because it's attempting to be me and have a good credit rating score. So the question is then, how do you detect fraud? Because this is a fraud case. Like the impersonation, it's phishing, goes into a lot of aspects.
Yeah.
So in payment specifically, we look at credit and fraud risk, and each looked at differently. So for credit risk, there's a high chance of automation. There's a high influence of OpenAI on this because there's a finite set of data which acts as an input variable into determining the credit score. Now, depending on the payment method, there's less or more freedom to use LLMs to make a decision. But largely, if you look at it from a tech point of view, very effective way of looking at it. Now, when it comes to fraud risk, this is a lot more tricky. Right? This could be the navigation trend a user is having on your website. This could be the ways a customer has logged into your website. Have they logged into your website via web previously? Is it a combination of web, app, and something else? This plays into it. We also look at what has their previous purchase trend been like. Very ambiguous space. And the probability of making a false positive is high. And this is what the risk businesses take on. Do we really want to? The question on fraud risk for any business is really, do we want to take on the risk of disappointing 1 out of 1,000,000 customers and have the perception in the market that we're using AI to make a wrong decision? This is the real question ultimately. Because it only takes 1 out of 1,000,000 wrong decisions to spread a rumor or kind of falsify the degree to which a company is using AI. So, yep. I think to summarize, credit and fraud risk, credit risk, pretty high impact, low chances of false negatives, false positives, and fraud risk is a bit trickier. And so far from the discussions I've had, at least with industry leaders here in Berlin, at least, it's still in the exploration phase rather than full-on production.
Okay, cool. No, it's interesting because obviously the cybercrime field is growing, isn't it? It's a massive market. So it's interesting to see how businesses tackle this.
Yeah. One variable is the business, and the second one is really the legal entity they've established in a certain country, because their rules are very different in the US and largely the Americas versus Europe versus India, China, Singapore, Thailand, these kind of countries. But here again, in Berlin, also drawing some of my experiences from here at Ratepay, the way we look at problems. Risk, I think there's a lot of exploration to do there.
And then I guess, how can AI help like maturing businesses optimize their operations and reduce costs?
Yeah. Reducing costs is good news for some people and bad news for a lot of people. And especially recently, we've seen the wave of layoffs coming. But for me, when we say reduce cost, this can be in various ways. One is monetary cost. The other one is time and effort. So
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily looking at less people needed to do a work. It's the same people can do the same work with a higher level of quality. So that's my take on it.
Yeah.
And here again, I lean back on co-pilots. Right? If
Mm-hmm.
there's an urgent request that comes my way, say somebody says, "Hey, give me this quick analysis," and I have half a day to do it. 7 years ago, I would have lost it. Saying, "This is impossible. Stakeholder, please go back and talk to someone else."
Yeah.
Same situation now. I don't even break a sweat because there's Copilot to help me write code that does what it should do, retrieves the right data set, and tells me where I need to optimize the code. So, in terms of improving the effectiveness rather than efficiency,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is where it's having a huge impact. And depending on the company, it's having various levels of influence on how they're planning and prioritizing activities. So,
Yeah.
in business, in tech at least, there's this concept of P0s, P1s when it comes to what's the most important thing we should do. There's a good chance business can prioritize more of these business critical key results into the same cycle and have bigger impact.
And then, obviously, the fintech space is obviously security is critical, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how can firms or fintech firms balance the power of AI with the need to protect like data privacy and obviously user data?
Um, Reflecting really hard right now on my own personal experiences. And I can't really draw anything from my
Mm-hmm.
exposure to privacy and audit and compliance. Like, at least in my experience over the
Okay.
last 3-4 years, I haven't been involved in this realm. But if I think of what have I seen on generally, say, social media or the internet, there's a lot of use cases where effort of documentation is being reduced significantly by introducing OpenAI. So things like some of this
Mm-hmm.
grunt work, which happens in law firms or Medicare, like medical care, for example, this is where it's having a lot of impact. If I try to think of information security in the payments realm, I'm defaulting back to this facial recognition, two-factor authentication, these realms. And I can't come up with any internal use cases for the organization. Maybe this is just something that's as a byproduct of being in Germany, where generally country seems to be a bit behind in the adoption curve of new tech, which could be a good or bad thing.
Okay.
But if I were to be in a different place, I think I might have had more exposure to it.
Yeah. No. And then to end on the final question, then, what emerging trends will impact fintech?
Yeah.
We'll see what your future, what
Yeah.
you feel the future holds.
I think for me, I don't see a huge impact on these. So let me rephrase. Especially in the data role, there are strategic topics and there are operational topics. I see LLMs
Mm-hmm.
and OpenAI having a huge impact on operational topics, right? Be it kind of text-based OpenAI image or embeddings. OpenAI is really catered towards doing this of repeating what was done in the past. So if there are 10 people who have written a certain code, you can extract parts of it and then develop new code. This is what it does really well. It helps developers and analysts do their work really quickly. They don't have to worry about indentation. They don't have to worry about documentation because it comes out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
Where I struggle with it, though, is understanding if it has any influence on these kind of strategic and creative problem solving aspects. So one example is, rather than an example, my line of thinking here, OpenAI is really good at repeating known tasks, extracting components from them, and creating a new task. That means it's making a certain work highly predictable. So we know what the outcome could look like much faster. Now, it's all about given understanding the full impact OpenAI can have on a certain problem and predicting the problem that come up with it. So again, it goes back to businesses focusing on strategy a bit more, saying, given the employees are using OpenAI, and now this becomes a fact, what are the problems that are on the horizon as a consequence? So that is more of my curiosity, and what kind of guidance could they need to apply it in a way that is mutually beneficial, not only to the people using it, but also in kind of this cascading effect it has on your horizontal teams or your vertical teams.
So in terms, do you think it's going to be more beneficial on the operations aspect for businesses in the future? And you think that's going to be the biggest impact?
Yep. So we've seen this wave of layoff happening, but even if we abstract it to a continental level, it kind of averages around 10-15% across the continent. And unlikely this would happen more. So as a consequence, because the operational aspects are becoming more sophisticated, becoming more efficient due to OpenAI, the rate at which companies hire for new people might slow down. So overall, the companies will continue to see good output. There will be incremental ROI to be made there. But in terms of the impact it has on hiring and creating new kind of employment opportunities, this might be the dark side of it. And sorry? I just want to finish by saying strategically, I think people who are in this realm of creative problem solving, so problems that need to be solved, but in a non-programmatic way, these will continue to exist, but as a consequence of automation, again, might not grow as much as they've been growing historically.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely is going to be interesting times ahead. Yeah, I guess you never know what's going to be. You never know what's going to be around the corner, do you? Like,
yeah,
things happen, but I think obviously, yeah, things will change because obviously it's part and parcel. It's just who knows what's going to happen around the corner.
Yep. It reminds me of these videos from 60s or 50s where they try to predict what the future would look like. The designs they had of cars or buildings, or like what automation could look like. So who knows in 50, 60 years from now, when we look back on what did we think AI would do? If you look back on history, very good chance it's not what we predict it's going to do.
I did predict robots and we're nearly there.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's brilliant. Cool. I really appreciate your insights shared today. It's been really great. And yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thanks, Manil.